All right, folks, those who choose to watch, those who choose to listen, we're back. Second episode going after this. I really don't know if I should even call them episodes. This is more just not personal rants, but just conversations with myself inside my apartment. But anyway, for those who are coming back, welcome back. Little Padres power hour here on a nice little Wednesday night. As I put in the description originally, this is going to be a little bit of a talk about Luis Arraez, what I think San Diego should kind of do with that contract, checking in on the Padres prospects that are in the AFL. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other possible extensions that were brought up by Dennis Lin in his most recent article in The Athletic regarding Jackson Merrill and Michael King. So we'll jump right into it. The first thing I wanted to talk about is the thing I kind of headlined at the front was Luis Arraez, the conversation about his upcoming arbitration, how San Diego should handle it, and which direction they should really go with it. So first thing, just kind of want to give an overview of what Arraez was last season. 2024, not maybe a mixed bag is a way to put it. It wasn't up to his standards. I think if you compare him to the recent years that he's had, he's been a 4-WAR player. I think one of his seasons had a high, maybe a low 3-WAR year as well. This year, 1.1 NF4, 109 WRC plus, 0.323 WOBA. You have to take all those numbers, obviously, with a grain of salt because this is a guy who's playing with what was clearly a pretty serious thumb injury for him. If you need surgery, playing through it the whole year, credit to him for being tough, sticking to the top of the lineup. The real question is, though, with what he is, what are the Padres going to do with his upcoming arbitration? I think people may have seen the tweet that I sent out maybe about last week this time about, for my personal opinion, my personal take, I wouldn't want to go above $8 million if I was a GM for the San Diego Padres for Luis Arraez. Now, I think if I'm being honest, maybe a number closer to $10 million a year, if you are going to want to offer an extension, is maybe what I would go to on its peak. But anything above $10 million, if the Padres offer that to Luis Arraez, I would raise a bit of an eyebrow with, because I don't know if Luis Arraez is a player that you want to pay upwards of 12, 13, 14, $15 million. Right now, his arbitration number sits at $14.6 million. That's estimated per Fangraphs. I just don't know if you can pay a player who's a one hyper elite tool player that kind of money. So to put it in perspective, yes, the best pure contact back to ball hitter that there probably is in Major League Baseball. But once you get outside of that, it becomes a player who honestly isn't very good at a lot of other things. I mean, again, if you just look at the defensive numbers, -12 OAA, that's in the first percentile among all Major League defenders. He's a 12th percentile arm strength. He's 30th percentile in rush and just pure speed on the base paths. 1.6% barrel rate, 23.7% hard hit rate. Outside of that killer ability to make contact with the baseball, the value that Luis Arraez provides to you isn't that astronomical, especially in the spot that the Padres are leaning on him right now. Again, Fangraphs had written, I forget who the author was, but had pointed out that his value, truthfully, at the top of the lineup isn't that great because singles aren't that valuable when guys aren't on base. His role actually, as Fangraphs pointed out, would be better put back in the later part of the lineup if you had him hitting 3-hole. Because when you get singles with guys on, obviously that becomes a more inherently valuable hit. But when no one's on and you're leading off an inning, his role atop the lineup is kind of odd. I know it worked great this year for sort of setting the table when he was there, but I would be interested if they kept him long-term, if that move to a back part of the lineup, not the end of the lineup, but more towards the middle, would be something that they would seek out. Because again, he doesn't walk. He doesn't strike out, which is great, but his only value at the top of the lineup is if he gets a base hit, because he's not walking. I mean, we're talking about a guy that had less than a 6% walk percentage this year and throughout his career has just opted not to walk, which I think is such an interesting dynamic, because I know Luis knows the strike zone. He has to know the strike zone. He just opts not to take walks. I wonder if that would ever become a conversation with him in San Diego about trying to actively look for more walks. Maybe not. Who knows? But I think, again, for me personally, $14.6 million for an arbitration number is really high. To give some context of where that would sort of land him, that's in the same ballpark as average annual earnings next year of guys like Manny Machado who's on the team, Ketel Marte, Zach Gallen, Josh Naylor is scheduled to make around that money projection wise. Does he fit in that same echelon as some of those players I just listed? Personally, no. I don't think he's in terms of that value for a contract around those same players. Now, look, obviously, the value of a player goes far beyond just what they put on the field, even though that is the biggest asset that a player has. But looking at his pro side of things, yeah, he fits what the offense of the Padres looks to be in terms of an identity. This is a team that's predicated on being tough outs. You know, maybe, yes, they can slug, but just getting on base, being tough outs. And I think the bigger thing almost than that in terms of fitting the offensive identity is fitting the identity as a whole for the Padres. I think Luis Arraez is a great clubhouse fit for this team. And if we learned anything from 2023, it's that San Diego is a team that definitely needs those guys that gel well. They need the Profars of the world. They need a Luis Arraez of the world to stick in there and kind of help things not function, but make sure that the intensity level's high and just that camaraderie and chemistry inside the clubhouse sticks together really well. But again, I don't know. The arbitration will be so hard for San Diego's $14.6 million is a lot of money to give this guy who, again, I view as a singular hyper tool player with that ability to hit the ball. Now, I think the Padres will try to go ahead and try to find a way to get an extension, maybe avoid arbitration. I think that $10 to $11 million range, plus the security of multiple years, could lure Arraez to the Padres' direction. Maybe also, though, they take the risk of non-tendering him. Now, as some of you may see from the tweet that I put out, that is inherently risky because if you go out there and you decide to non-tender him and he hits the open market, you could lose him. He could go to another team. He could find his way onto maybe an in-division rival that you have to see him constantly. That would be problematic. Or B, say you still have the aspiration of signing him. By refusing to give him that arbitration money and non-tendering him, you have possibly strained the relationship with that player, which becomes troublesome because again, that goes to if you're going to try to pursue this guy in free agency, if you do non-tender him, it's going to be kind of hard for you to go to the negotiation table and be like, hey, well, I know we kind of did you wrong, but we want you back. So here's where I think things will ultimately end up lining up, though, for San Diego. If you look at AJ Preller's track record, he's never taken a player to arbitration. In his entire history as the GM of the Padres, I don't think that's how he operates. And I don't imagine that right now this season with the guy that I think he knows is inherently valuable to his ball club, that he's going to start doing that now. I do expect San Diego to go out there, probably meet the arbitration number. And if they don't do that, I would expect San Diego to give him a contract extension offseason. He'll be with the team next year no matter what. And again, I don't see this going the way that maybe I would handle it, which is taking the risk of a non-tender and then maybe taking some of those assets that you possibly saved and addressing other areas and then trying to get him back on the cheap. Not on the cheap, but just on lesser than $14 million. But ultimately, like I said, I think this goes with Arraez either getting the money because Preller's never taken a player to arbitration, or with them working out a contract negotiation that I feel like lands probably in that $10 to $12 million AAV with just more security backed up behind it. I don't see a way that they go the non-tendering route like I maybe personally would handle it. So, but it's probably for the best that I'm not the Padres GM. So that's a whole battle in itself. So again, for Arraez, maybe not his best year. Maybe Petco Park truthfully doesn't even fit his game that well. It's not a good place for singles hitters. If you look it up by StatCast ballpark factor, it ranks in the bottom 10 for singles. That's why his numbers home and away were so dramatic. But again, he's a guy who fits the Padres offense extremely well. He's someone who I think is really important to this clubhouse and really helped form the identity for this team in the second half of the season. And again, like he's just he's someone who San Diego, I think, has an invested interest in keeping around not only next year, but moving forward. I just hope it's not above $12 million a year. Or something higher than that. Cause then I think it just is like, right, did we not learn anything from some of the other contracts that we handed out in recent years where it's hindered us and you have to kind of, play on cheap in years that you don't want to. So again, Arraez, he'll be around. They're not going to go the route that I think. Preller has shown a history of taking care of his players. He's never taken a guy to arbitration. So I expect Luis Arraez to either, again, get the arbitration deal done or they come to a contract negotiation. Those are the two most likely outcomes in my mind. So moving on, spent a little 10 minutes there on Luis Arraez. Go back and watch it again if you were late to that. But while the Padres season has unfortunately ended, as many of us know, actually every one of us know, who wouldn't be aware of that? If you're not aware of the Padres season being over, that's on you. Anyway, moving forward though, the next topic for the night, Arizona Fall League. So as hard as it has been for me, and I'm sure for many other Padres fans to accept the reality that the 2024 season is done now, there are some still cool things moving around down in the complexes out in Arizona, with players like Ethan Salas, Leodalis De Vries, Roman Sanabria, Ryan Burgett, Brandon Durfee. And if we're going to start off by talking about any of the AFL players, we have to start with Ethan Salas. I can remember a time not too long ago where it was the middle of July. And when I would post stuff about Salas, starting to pick it up a little bit, people would just take the screenshot of his batting numbers from MLB.com, which, by the way, kids, if that's where you're getting your only stats, look deeper than those baseline 4 stats you get from MLB.com. And they're like, oh, he's hitting 210. His OPS is under 700. We should give up on this guy. We should give up on the player who, if it was a normal high schooler, would be getting ready for, as many people pointed out, his senior year prom. He was only 17. Now he's 18. And look what he's doing. Oh, he's facing better pitching at the AFL, and the adjustments that he made towards the end of the year in Fort Wayne have started to pay off. And over his last 10 at bats, he's hitting too close to 280. His OPS is near 800 in those last 110 at bats. And now in the AFL, he has a 242 isolated power. He's a 986 OPS, and he's hitting 343. What you're seeing with Salas right now, at least in my mind, is a player who is not only clearly more confident, but the adjustments that he consciously made have paid off huge. I think the Padres as an organization have made similar tweaks to his swing that they did with Merrill when he was putting the ball on the ground too much in the minors. The hands, they moved those. He's using his leverage more, as he pointed out. And again, he's not sacrificing his plate discipline for the increased power that he's gotten. He's a little bit looser in his lower half. He talked about it on Baseball America's Hot Stove. I'll link that somewhere. He had a great conversation with JJ Cooper and their editorial staff over there. But what you're seeing with Salas is what happens when talent and adjustments come together. There was never a reason in the season for anyone to give up on this kid at any point. I don't know why that was some sort of rhetoric that was built up that an 18-year-old who was struggling at the high A level should somehow there's no way he can recover from this. Because clearly, again, I know it's maybe only 9 games in the AFL, but he's torn it up. I mean, he's hitting balls with power the other way. He's got 6 extra base hits. His 12 hits, I believe, are tied for 5th in the AFL with names like Colt Emerson, who are expected to possibly be in the show next season. He has thrived in this environment that they've put him in. And I think it's good that San Diego ended up doing this, because he talked about it himself that when the season came to an end in Fort Wayne, it was a moment where he was like, I don't want this to end because it's working. He's figured something out. And now in the AFL, he's looking like that guy that was, top 10 prospect in baseball at the beginning of the season. I know, Baseball Prospectus, Baseball America moved him down a little bit to like the 20s, 25s. I think after this showing and by the start of next season, he's going to be back into that top 10 pretty much consensus wide. I mean, I don't know how you've looked at what he's done so far and been like, oh, this is still the same guy that we saw playing in Fort Wayne in mid-July. That's not the case. This is a kid who's clearly made adjustments, who's clearly just getting better. That's the basis of it all, is that he is continuing to get better, and he has the projectability, he has the confidence, he has everything that you would want in an 18-year-old catcher who is going to be the future backstop for San Diego. I still feel very confident about that. So for Salas, again, 242 ISO, phenomenal. 986 OPS, phenomenal. 343 average, phenomenal. Everything that you could want him to accomplish at the Arizona Fall League the first couple weeks, he's done. Not only, I mean, forget the offensive numbers only. He still looks like a stud defensively. And that's the thing that'll be interesting with Salas is that a lot of people want to focus on the bat, obviously, because that's usually what prospects get focused on. But the pop time that he has behind the dish, the quick hands, the feel for the game that he has defensively, it should almost is more impressive than what he can do offensively. He's not a sure thing. No prospect's ever a sure thing. I'm not ever going to say that he's a sure thing because that puts too much pressure on him inherently. But he's starting to look the part again. And I think this performance of the AFL, if he's going to continue it through, is so big for him moving forward. And it's even better for the organization in San Diego because the catching position outside of him long term, not great. I still believe in Luis Campusano, but we're running a little bit dry on that well. I like Kyle Higashioka. I hope they bring him back in free agency to be sort of that bridge veteran gap catcher. But Salas is the real deal. This is only affirming it in the AFL performance. And again, I just hope he finishes out this AFL schedule strong and keeps his ball rolling. Everything that you've wanted to see from him in this first couple weeks, it's been there. So kudos to him. Big tip of the cap. Now, the second name that people will probably want to focus on from the AFL is going to be De Vries. I will say this for Leo. I mean, again, if you look at the raw numbers, it's only been about 7 games for him. He's hitting, 594 OPS, 234 batting average. I think the biggest thing that you're happy to see from him too is that he missed the tail end of the single A season in Lake Elsinore due to his shoulder injury. Hasn't looked hindered by that at all. He's got 9 strikeouts so far, but the biggest thing, again, I look at him, he's just now 18 years old there. He's playing with guys. Again, the AFL is used for players that organizations think is going to be making an impact at the major league level here in the near future. And at 18 years old, I know he's got the strikeouts, but he hasn't looked super overmatched all that often. I think the at-bats have looked good. I think the approach to the plate has looked good. The game that he played in yesterday had 2 at-bats. He took the 9+ pitches, ended up grounding out and striking out. But you saw the back control. You saw the advanced approach to the plate. So everything for De Vries, again, at 18, being there is a crazy thing, much like it is for Salas. But he's shown you a lot just in these couple of appearances that he's made out there in Arizona. I don't know really what the expectation is for him moving forward the rest of the AFL. Honestly, for myself, I would only expect him to get better. I know that he kind of had a similar slow start when he first came up in Lake Elsinore, where it took him a couple weeks to really get things going. But then he hit 1 home run, and then he hit another, and it just kind of all snowballed until he finished the season with a WRC plus over 120, an OPS in the last month over 900. So I would expect De Vries by the time we get to the end of the AFL to be with an OPS, maybe in 750, somewhere in that range. Again, I think he's already hit a couple balls off the wall. And he's done a couple nice jobs of just going the other way with pitches, continuing to maintain a really good approach. So again, for the youngest guy in the AFL, I think De Vries has looked fine. I know the strikeouts are there. OPS is low. ISO is 0.043. But everything that you want to see in an 18-year-old facing 22, 23-year-old guys that are on the cusp of major league appearances, he hasn't looked overmatched in the slightest in my eyes. He's looked quite good. So I continue to be impressed with him. So if you're the Padres, your top 2 guys in Salas and De Vries, who you've sent to a place that is typically, again, used for guys who are about to make that next step to major leagues, you should be thrilled. They've looked good. They haven't looked like fish out of water. I'm very happy with what I've seen from them. So moving down the list, we're going to go ahead and go to Romeo Sanabria. This is a guy who's a little bit underrated in the organization as a whole. He's a number 23 prospect for the Padres within their system, according to MLB.com. But I would say across the minors this year, he might have been collectively the most consistent and sneaky under the radar prospect San Diego had at the plate. So he played 3 levels this year. He was in single A, high at Fort Wayne, ended the season in San Antonio. I think he's only one of 5 guys across the minors this year that collected for a slash line of over 280, more than 30 doubles, and more than 10 home runs across multiple minor league levels. And again, all sort of flew under the radar for Sanabria. And he's carried that really strong performance that he had this past season in the minors into the AFL. Now, power is still not there for Romeo, which as a first baseman, as a possible DH, you'd like to see more of it. But for context, this year across all three levels, 13.1% walk, 15% walk percentage, 387 WOBA, and a 130 WRC plus. That's pretty dang good. That's pretty dang good for someone who's your number 23 prospect in the system. And in the AFL, I know it's only 8 games, and maybe I'm making too much of 8 games, but he's continued that trend. 13.1% walk percentage, a 333 batting average, a .407 on base percentage. Now, again, for myself, if he's going to be someone who sticks at a corner infield position, specifically first base, we're going to need a little bit better than a .042 ISO. Maybe a little bit more in the slugging department. I think he slugged less than 470 this past season. You're going to need more than that moving forward, especially if you, like I said, he wants to stick at the corner. But bat to ball skills are good. He's continuing to take walks. The approach to the plate is what San Diego looks for in their prospects. He's a guy who's patient, can go the other way. And I think the thing, too, that's stood out to me the most from when he's played in the AFL is that the exit velocity number has been good. Like when they've had StatCast data on Romeo's games, there's been 107 popping up. There's 106 popping up. There's 109 popping up. This isn't soft contact that's just falling in. This is hard contact that's consistently finding gaps, consistently getting through a hole. So, again, for San Diego, if this is your number 23 guy, not saying he's going to make an impact here next season, but it's a piece. It's a little depth piece that maybe at some point, if they need an emergency call-up later end of the year, he could be a guy that they look to. Or, as we know with Preller, maybe he's someone who has a really good AFL, has a strong start to 2025. He gets shipped off. But anyway, I've liked what I've seen out of him. I think he's made a lot of strides. He's someone who, again, power needs to come in a little bit more. But anytime you have 130 WRC plus across a minor league system, you hit 280 over 3 levels, you're going to have my interest. And that's what Sanabria has. So I think he's had a really good AFL, just continuing to build on what's been a really strong 2024 for him. Now, the next name I want to talk about, I've posted about him a lot. Maybe it's because he went to the same school as my sister, UC Santa Barbara. But Brendan Durfee being at the AFL, to me, is interesting. If you look at a lot of these rosters the teams put together, it's pretty rare that a guy who's a 14th round pick in this year's draft gets an invitation to the AFL. That's exactly where Durfee's at right now. And it's not some sort of like, oh, we needed an extra catcher in there somewhere. Like, oh, we had to throw someone on the roster. This was a guy that when he showed up in Lake Elsinore, raked and put the ball in the air with authority, hit for power. In his 20 games for Lake Elsinore, he collected a stat line of 140 WRC plus, 418 WOBA, and a 14.1% walk percentage. Again, the Padres love players who at the plate can walk, can play for a little bit of power, and are just consistently a tough out. Durfee fits all of those. I expect Durfee and a guy like Jack Costello, who they drafted out of USD, to be accelerated risers through this system. Preller likes to challenge his college bats. I expect him to do that again this coming season with Durfee. I expect him to do it with Costello. But again, if Durfee being here means something, they gave him an AFL roster spot. Again, he got drafted in July, was down in the Padres Complex League, came up, went up to Lake Elsinore. Now he's here. Now maybe I'm putting my tinfoil cap on too much. I'm thinking far too much. But again, the catching position's a little bit thin in San Diego system. Now, I know some people might say, oh, obviously Salas is there, but Salas, in my opinion, is still more than a year away. Lamar King Jr. is there, but Lamar King Jr. hasn't played behind the plate since 2023. I know that could become, he's returning from a shoulder injury, and I really like his bat, but he's not someone who I view as a possibly close to solution to catcher for the short term. Brandon Valenzuela, he's Rule 5 eligible. He's glove only, 85 WRC plus this past season for San Antonio. I know he had a couple moments maybe up there for El Paso, but truth be told, I think of everyone who is in the Padres organization, not named Salas, who has an opportunity in the next year to possibly be up with San Diego. I think there's an opportunity for it to be Durfee. Because again, like Valenzuela is Rule 5 eligible. Some team could pick up him and he could be gone from the San Diego organization. But Durfee had great numbers at UCSB. I think in a small sample size last year in Lake Elsinore, this past season, Lake Elsinore, you saw exactly what he can be. A guy who can hit for power, a guy who's patient at the plate. You don't have a 140 WRC plus in your first professional at bats for no reason. This is a guy who can play. So again, really minimal at bats for Durfee, but the fact that he's there means something. Again, maybe chalk it up to me having a tinfoil cap on, but I think his being there, the Padres' decision as an organization to stick him there and have him give him more opportunities means they're interested in him and means they want to see more from him. Something tells me down the line, don't be shocked if Durfee's name starts coming up a little bit more, just a little bit more. And he's continued to show stuff at the AFL that I like. Just don't be shocked. That's all I'm saying. Now, the pitching end of the things for the Padres hasn't necessarily been great at the AFL. If there's a name you really would want to focus on, in my mind, Ryan Burgett's a guy who at the start of last season was inside the Padres top 10 in their system. He's down to about 26 now. He's Rule 5 eligible as well, much like Valenzuela. So he could be someone who's out the door. Last year was tough for Burgett. And the AFL has been kind of tough for him too. But for myself personally, again, I bet more on stuff than I do results. And I do think it's interesting of what he's kind of done. He's usually a sweeper slider guy. He's mixing the cutter here at the AFL. It's actually graded out pretty well from what I've seen, again, because I do have some StatCast data there. I believe the cutter graded out with a 106 per TJ Stuff Plus. That's pretty good. Extension on the fastball is getting about 6.3 feet of extension. That's solid. Again, though, this past season wasn't necessarily, I think, what Burgett wanted. He's been fine in the AFL. Again, pitching there can be tough because you're in an Arizona environment. The ball flies out. I don't know. Burgett's such an interesting case because I was high on him going into last year, but then I felt like the fastball velocity dipped off. The shape wasn't as good. The slider, I think, is the thing that definitely is what would carry him most. I think it's his nastiest pitch of the arsenal. The cutter is an interesting wrinkle, just doesn't give you another pitch to go ahead and attack left-handers with. But truth be told, Burgett's sort of fallen off for me just a touch. Again, maybe he turns around in the last couple weeks, but I'm not going to keep the expectations as high as they were on him last season because of what he did in 2024. He walked more guys. Strikeouts were down. Stuff just wasn't fooling guys as much. And again, he's been in the Padres system for a number of years now. He's a Rule 5 eligible player. I won't be, again, my expectations for him have just sort of floated away a little bit. They're not where they once were. So that's kind of the AFL recap again. Your top end guys, you got to be satisfied with what you found here with Salas regaining confidence. De Vries has looked good. I like what you've seen from Durfee. I like what you've seen from Sanabria. Your hitters are performing well. Pitching staff, again, it's tough to be there in that environment. It can be a little bit different. Guys' arms can also be a little bit tired. I mean, I know for Burgett himself, speaking on him, third straight years with over 100 innings on him. Maybe just some wear and tear starting to show up after a little bit of a break there to end the season. So, again, top end, you're happy about it. You've seen some nice developments from the guys in the lower half. But that's kind of the wrap on that. Last thing I did want to kind of touch about, again, that I talked about at the top, was the situation with Michael King and the situation with Jackson Merrill. Not situations, just the conversation about, hey, maybe they want to do an extension here in the near future. That's on the table. At least it's somewhere has been discussed about trying to get those two under contract for the long term. So the question becomes, at least in my mind, again, the Padres have this luxury tax threshold that they want to be under, or at least that they've seemed to indicate that they want to stay under. But my first thought on this is, if they've talked about these extensions, and these three names of Arraez, Merrill, and King have all come up, then part of me thinks that they not only are interested in going over the luxury tax, but they sort of have to, unless they're planning on moving cash from some other contract, which I don't know where they would at this point. I don't think anyone's taking Bogarts. No one's taking a Cronenworth. They're not moving Machado. They're not moving Tatis. That's not happening. So if they're talking about these extensions, they certainly have to be willing to maybe go over that luxury tax threshold. But when it comes to looking at King or when it comes to looking at Merrill, obviously I think there's going to be a pecking order of who would you prefer to get done first. Now, the argument for Merrill is that, hey, he had nearly a 6 F-WAR season this past year. Looks like the second best center fielder in baseball, not named Aaron Judge. Great offensive numbers. He's only 21. He's only going to continue to get better. The longer you let him play this out without getting him under a contract extension, the more likely it becomes the price tag only goes up because he's not going to take a hometown discount, nor should really any team or player, I should say, take a hometown discount because your opportunities when contracts are coming up is get as much money as you possibly can. And that's, I'm sure, what he and his agent will do. But if you're San Diego, yeah, getting him under contract sooner rather than later would be good because then you can possibly get a contract that looks a little bit like Tatis's. I know people, when that first happened, was like, wow, it's a lot of money. But if you make comparisons to some of the contracts that's been given out now, it looks pretty damn good. Or you can maybe somehow find a way to do what the Braves do and, I don't know, 8 years, like $100 million. He agrees to that for some reason. Probably won't happen. But you can get him on the cheap, and that way you save money more on down the line. However, I think if you're going to prioritize someone, it would be Michael King in my eyes. And I'll explain why. King's a free agent after this year. Dylan Cease will be a free agent after this year. If you're looking at the players you feel like among your pitching staff that you can get extended of those two, I would feel like King is a much more viable answer. I have a feeling that Cease is going to want to test free agency. And I also feel like he'll think he'll command more based off of his track record. King, though, for my money, was the best pitcher on the San Diego Padres starting pitching staff last season. And you need an ace going forward. And I think what you saw in the postseason, what you saw since May 1st was, again, not only just the best pitcher on the Padres, but probably the second best pitcher in the National League, not named Chris Sale. So for that reason, I would go after King. He should be the target number one of those two if you're going to look for an extension. I mean, again, let me just search up some of his numbers here on Fangraphs real quick because I was always enamored with them. The stuff only seemed to get better as the year went on. I mean, again, usually you would see with a guy who's transitioning from a reliever from last season, the middle of last season, to a starter full time, velocities tick down, RPMs tick down on the secondary stuff. None of that really ever happened for King. And again, when you go to, let me just look at this. From May 1st, just read off the numbers again to remind everyone what he did from May 1st on. May 1st on, Michael King had a 2.42 ERA. He had a 2.56 FIP. He had a 2.17 opponent batting average. He struck out 28.5% of batters he faced. All of those ranked among the top 5 in Major League Baseball among starting pitchers and ranked inside the top 5 among National League starting pitchers. He's a Cy Young caliber pitcher when he's healthy. He showed you that this season. And I still think because he only has done it for a year and a half, you can get him for relatively cheaper than what he would certainly command on the open market. Or maybe if you had the ability, I mean, again, just on the open market, you can lock him up for less. And again, the Padres have so many question marks moving forward. Not so many, but more than a few moving forward on the starting rotation. Like, yeah, Darvish is still there, but Darvish is obviously getting older. He dealt with injuries this year. There's no Joe Musgrove until 2026. And then beyond that, you're dealing with a bunch of question marks. Like, hey, are we going to rely on Matt Waldron? How many innings are guys like Brito and Randy Bass is going to get? You're obviously going to bring in a free agent, either short term or maybe a guy like Nick Pivetta more long term. So I think King, because of the situation, the starting pitching staff, you need to get him locked in there. Make sure you at least have one guy to add with Darvish for the foreseeable future who can be a dominant arm, who can be an ace in the postseason. And I think you let Merrill go maybe one more year before you go ahead and lock up that extension. And here's another thing I will say against the idea of extending Merrill this offseason. Obviously, you want to get it done. But the beauty of having a young player who's this good is that they're cheap. And again, I know some people will point and say, oh, but if he has another year, he becomes that much more expensive. Deal with that when you get there. But for now, sort of live off the beauty that you're dealing with a player who's only making, I mean, he's making, I think, less than $2 million next season. Certainly, I'd have to go look it up exactly, but he's certainly less than what it would be if he's trying to do a contract extension. So for me, if you were to prioritize the two contracts, I think extension and King is more in need because he's a free agent next year. And you can just continue to have Jackson Merrill play on a little bit cheaper deal. And then maybe next offseason, you reward him with that money. So King's my priority among those two. Obviously, you want to get that Merrill deal done in the near future, but prioritize the pitching that you already have on your staff and that you need to bolster the rotation because of the question marks moving forward. So yeah, those are kind of little bits and pieces that I had from today. Not much else. Wish there was more news for the Padres to kind of report on just in terms of World Series hype. I really wish we were still in there. I think like countless others, but this is where we lie. I don't think, if I'm being honest with myself, I don't think I can watch the World Series. As much as I would like to hate watch, it's still too hard for me to sit there and grasp this idea that, I feel like we had the talent to be there and we just squandered the opportunity, but that's just kind of the way things work. So, but yeah. Oh, fun news for those few people that are listening though. I myself personally, this coming weekend will be in Arizona for the Arizona Fall League. Have some opportunities to get some questions in with some of the Padres prospects that are out there in Arizona. Get some video of those guys. So make sure to keep a watchful eye out for that. Hopefully, getting a couple interviews in there and some good content for you guys to go ahead and take a look at. So that'll be really enjoyable. And yeah, so we'll probably do another one of these. Maybe when I'm out there in Arizona. Who knows? Maybe a little short one. Maybe a little live thing. But until then, it's been enjoyable as always. We'll see what they do with the Arraez contract. I wouldn't love to pay that $14.6 million price tag. I'd like for them to go ahead and be able to maybe come to a contract extension that's both long-term security for him, but also financially something that the Padres can get around. And for the AFL guys that are already out there, you got to be thrilled with what you've seen from Ethan Salas. Personally, I'm thrilled with what I've seen from Leodalis De Vries, a guy who's just turned 18, who continues to look like someone who belongs against guys that are older than him, doesn't look out of his element. So for all those things, I think San Diego's still in a good spot heading in next season. We'll see what they do with with Michael King and Jackson Merrill debating those contract extensions. I'd go King first before Merrill. But yeah, keep those eyes peeled for some good old AFL content. I'll make sure to have some good stuff for you guys, but I appreciate you tuning in for the time and those who did. So have a good night, and I'll hopefully see y'all back next week.